Hi everybody and big welcome to a card review and also something of a deck tech video or for multiple deck tech videos, because in this video we're gonna go over a little bit how you could build Tazri Stalwart Survivor. It is a 3 mana cost white and 2 generic legendary creature human warrior 3/3 with 2 abilities. The first one is a passive ability. Each creature you control has tap, add 1 mana of any color this creature's color. Spend this mana only to activate an ability of a creature. Activate only if this creature has another activated ability. Then he has an activated ability. Pay 5 mana, 1 of each, and tap this guy. Mill 5 cards. Put all creature cards with activated abilities that aren't mana abilities from among the milled cards into your hand. This means that he doesn't really synergize with a land or elf, for example, which is a mana dork, a creature that taps and generates mana. Because the milled ability specifically says abilities that aren't mana abilities, so you're not gonna get a land or elf into your hand if you mill it. But a creature like Arbor Elf will work because that is not actually a mana ability, it's tap and untap a land. So Arbor Elf will go into your hand if you mill it into your graveyard with the Tazri's activated ability. But how are we gonna build this thing? Well, there's a lot of different options. So first off, you could build a 5-color Ad Nauseam deck, so to say. Most Ad Nauseam decks are usually on 4 colors, or sometimes just Grixis colors, because those are usually the best commanders to achieve a Ad Nauseam strategy of sorts. But a 5-color Ad Nauseam deck has its merits because you get access to more colors. You can build your Ad Nauseam storm strategy better. And also a low-cost commander will activate your Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Sword, as well as Mox Amber. But Tazri actually does something really good for your Underworld Breach Ad Nauseam strategy here. You see, you're milling cards, and that's good for your Underworld Breach. You could even actually make a Isochron Scepter Dramatic Reversal combo with this commander. You achieve infinite mana with your mana rocks, and also the Scepter and Dramatic Reversal will untap Tazri. And then you basically mill your entire deck until you have Breach in your graveyard, and then you use the infinite mana to flashback Sevin's Reclamation from the graveyard and win the game from there. And depending on how you build your deck, your activated ability could be a value ability, because you can have a lot of cards that actually function from the graveyard. Some decks can actually look at your graveyard and say, this is just a secondary hand. I mean, we have cards like Yawgmoth's Will that will actually help you out quite a lot in this regard. So the big advantage with this kind of style is that you're becoming a form of 5-color turbo deck with a low CMC cost commander that could help out the deck in a small regard, so to say, by milling cards and fueling your graveyard. And also building up flashback spells, like you could mill down things like Flash of Insight, a flashback spell for only 2 mana, and then you remove a bunch of blue cards from your graveyard and look at top X cards of the library. You may take one into your hand, so it's like an anticipate or impulse from the graveyard for 2 mana, so yeah, kinda okay. And we also have deep analysis, basically just 2 mana, lose 3 life and draw 2 cards. Pretty good if you have it in your graveyard. But what about other Tazri builds? So there's a crazy cool card called Intruder Alarm. 1 blue, 2 generic enchantment. Creatures don't untap during your controller's untap step. Whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. So you activate Tazri and all of your dorks, and you mill your library a little bit, and you hit a bunch of creatures. You cast, let's say, you find an Arbor Elf, and you cast the Arbor Elf, you will untap Tazri and all of your other mana dorks, which, by the way, Tazri will make a lot of your creatures into mana dorks as well. And from here you could basically go infinite or not infinite, you could fizzle, but if you build your deck really correctly, you have a really high ratio of creatures, you're turning Intruder Alarm into a 1-card combo basically. There's just a bunch of problems in this. A creature like Daffy Voidwalker has an activated ability, so he will actually gain the activated ability from Tazri, because you can tap and sacrifice Daffy Voidwalker, that is an activated ability, so he will now also be able to tap for mana. However, the mana Daffy Voidwalker is generating can only be used into creature activations, like Tazri creature's activation here, for example. Daffy Voidwalker's ability can't be used to actually cast creatures from your hand that you draw into with Tazri. Because if the first ability basically reads, add 1 mana of any of these creature's colors, spend this mana only to activate an ability of a creature. So no, if you draw into a Arbor Elf, you can't use Daffy Voidwalker to cast the Arbor Elf. But if you have a really high ratio of dorks inside the deck, like all the various dorks you could think of, then you're usually pretty fine. Because here's the thing, you don't need that many dorks actually, maybe you just need 2 to 3 depending on. Because the deck that I'm envisionizing here with Intruder Alarm as a 1-card combo is a really low CMC ratio among all the creature cards that you have inside your deck. You see, all creature cards in your deck is going to be able to generate mana into Tazri's 5 mana activated ability. So all the other dorks, these ones, are going to be used to cast the creature afterwards. So in other words, you need something like 2 to 3 dorks to generate the 2 to 3 mana to cast whatever creature card you draw into with Tazri, and all the other creatures that you draw into with Tazri are gonna help you activate Tazri. So that's a solved problem. However, it also means that we're gonna need something like 7 to 9 creatures when we're able to pop off and win. Because most creatures are gonna suffer from summoning sickness. So even if you activate Tazri and you find a bunch of more and you start to climb the ladder, you need more to begin with because of summoning sickness. However, this can be kinda solved with a Anger that, by the way, does not have an activated ability on it, which is actually good in this case, because as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. Solved! So with Anger you could start at a lower count of creatures, so you activate Tazri, you flip Anger into your graveyard, boom, all the creatures have haste, you cast a creature, you untap everything, you don't really have enough to start the loop again, but with the creature that comes into play, you're gonna untap your creatures to ritual up a little bit forward, but also the creatures you now cast aren't suffering from summoning sickness, so you're building up your industry while you're trying to storm off. You're growing in better storm capacity the more you storm, so to say. Because here's another really important thing regarding Intruder Alarm. Whenever you cast a creature, untap all creatures. This means that you can, for example, let's say we have a Llanowar Elf in our hand, an Arbor Elf and Bird of Paradise in play. You tap both of the Bird of Paradise and Arbor Elf for 2 mana, and then you cast your Llanowar Elf. This is gonna untap both of them. But in this case, you're floating mana. Then you have a, let's say, Findon Elf in your hand, which also just costs 1 mana. So you tap both. And by the way, if you have a haste now, you can also tap the Llanowar Elf. So now you have 4 mana in your mana pool. And you go down to 3 by paying 1 for the Findon Elf, and you untap all of this. So now you're floating 3 mana, and you have 4 mana production. So this is a really good example of how you're increasing your production capability while ritualing out mana while doing so at the same time. So depending on what kind of board set you have, you don't need the 7 to 9 creatures. It kind of depends on what creatures you have and if you have haste or not. And I mean, this just makes an argument for potentially including Lightning Greaves, because Lightning Greaves can be sent around equipping everything. So in this sort of sense where you're tapping all the dorks one by one, Lightning Greaves will give haste to everything you have, in the same way as Anger will. But how are we building a deck focused around Intruder Alarm? I mean, we're gonna need a lot of creatures with activated abilities on them to make this kind of work. And we want to have good creatures, because like we don't really want to include bad creatures. We want to have creatures that are good individually on their own, something that are doing that other decks want to have just because that creature is good. And the question is, do we have enough? Well, we already mentioned Daffy Voidwalker. Ranger Captain of Eos is another really good example. That's an activated ability. You can sacrifice this thing. That is an activated ability. You can use this to tap him to activate your Tazri as well. Hope of Girapur is a smaller version to the Ranger Captain, only targeting 1 player. So if you have enough creatures in play that's going to be able to combo off, you could use Hope of Girapur to basically make one of your opponents unable to interact against you during your turn. Kinnan is going to be a busted card inside this deck. He's going to basically double the amount of creatures you have in play, so to say, because now all of your dorks are tapping for 1 more. He has an activate ability on him, so he will also synergize greatly with Tazri. Lonis is a decent creature. You can tap it, sacrifice things. That is an activate ability, so he will also be able to utilize the Tazri's passive ability as well. Deathrite Shaman has 3 non-mana abilities on him. Yes, the first one where you exile a land is not a mana ability. So he can both help you cast your creatures from your hand as well as activating Tazri. There's this new creature, Drana and Lavinia, a little bit expensive, but it's removing all the activate abilities of your opponent's creatures, while this one is gaining all of them. And if he just gains any form of ability from any creature, it will actually synergize with your commander's activate ability. However, I should point out that this creature will actually not go to your hand, because on it doesn't actually have any activated abilities. It's just gaining activated abilities, so to say. Cycling is an activated ability, so yes, this will go into your hand, and yes, this will be able to tap for mana, even though it actually can't really activate that ability in play, but it is an activated ability on a creature. I guess I should mention Dash, but first and foremost, this is not an activated ability. I repeat, Dash is not an activated ability. It will not work. Dash is an alternative casting cost. I'm not a judge, so I might be wrong, but according to the rules I've read, it doesn't work. Fauna Shaman, a pretty good creature tutor. Discard a card, a creature card, pay 1 green mana, tap this and search library for a creature card and put it into play. This can find your Dockside Extortionist, etc. But is yes, an activated ability for your commander synergy as well. Same thing with Fiend Artisan, this is also an activated ability. Also a value tutor, so to say, that can find creature cards and put them directly into play. So this can find your Grand Abolisher, your Ranger Captain, your Dockside, your Gilded Drake, etc. Grenzo has an activated ability, and now we're starting to see a completely new deck emerge besides the Intruder Alarm. But this is also a card that will synergize with your Intruder Alarm, so to say, as well. You see, you could literally view Grenzo as a you view Tazri as a 5-color Grenzo commander deck. Grenzo is in the 99, but it's the real big mega engine for you. Because if you have, let's say, an Intruder Alarm in play, and you have a Grenzo in play, and Grenzo has a power of, like, let's say, 3. Because there's gonna be a bunch of free power creatures in your deck. But in general, you're gonna have a really low CMC and a really low power on your creatures, so Grenzo as a free will pretty much be able to find every creature inside your deck. Now, here's the cool thing. Every little creature with an activated ability on it will become a mana dork for your Grenzo. And if you have haste on everything, then Grenzo's storm capacity just grows continuously. Because with Intruder Alarm, Grenzo and Tazri in play, I mean, you can't lose from that point. Because if you have, like, let's say 4 creatures, you can activate Tazri twice. No, sorry, you can activate Grenzo twice. And if you hit only 1 creature, you get 2 more Grenzo activations. But if you hit 2 creatures, then you're gonna have 4 more Grenzo activations. And also, if you have haste, you're growing your Grenzo activations as well. And also, Grenzo will hit all creatures, not only the ones with activated abilities on him. So Grenzo will be an absolute powerhouse and a 5-color Grenzo inside the 99 basically. I personally think this is an all-star out to include for this kind of Intruder Alarm Tazri deck of sorts. But then we absolutely just have to mention Yisan, the Wandering Bard. He will also go infinite with the Intruder Alarm, depending on how you've built him, so to say. Well, in general, all you really need to do is just find your Grenzo on verse counter number 2. So, or well, it kind of depends. I mean, what you need, so to say. You could find your Dockside on 2, your Gilded Drake on 2, your Grand Abolisher on 2, or Ranger Captain on 3, depending on. But he will also untap together with all your mana dorks if there is an Intruder Alarm in play. Pretty good. And then you can just verse him up to infinite. Emil the Blessed is an activated ability, or a creature with an activated ability. And this can create a secondary Intruder Alarm with Village Bell Ringer that will untap all of your creatures. And by the way, you can tap your Emil to generate the mana into activating Emil. And then you just make infinite mana of any form of color and sorts. And then also, by the way, you're untapping your commander Tazri, so you can have infinite Tazri activations as well. Really good. I guess I should mention this creature, even though it's a little bit of a weird one. So it has an activated ability on it, so you can actually tap this creature for 1 red mana, and then you can use that 1 red mana that it generated itself to return itself back to your hand, which is gonna generate 1 red and 2 generic, which means you can recast the thing, trigger your Intruder Alarm, and if you have haste on that thing with your anger or any form of other sorts, but honestly you don't really need that either, because you could just tap any creature that taps for red and return this, and you have infinite Intruder Alarm triggers. Besides that, it doesn't really do anything, so I don't know if this is something you should play, but I thought I should mention it because it's a little bit funny here. However, it actually brings up a discussion regarding how do we actually win the game. Well, we're putting a lot of creatures into play. Purphoros is a creature in your library, and in your graveyard he is a creature, and he is a creature with an activated ability on him, so he will go to your hand here. Also, he will trigger whenever you put a creature into play, like that thing, and we already established that we could have infinite grinding Ignus, so to say. Now, if we don't have Intruder Alarm, but if we have Anger or Lightning Greaves, we'd have haste on the grinding Ignus, which means that you can actually make infinite here. Cool! I still don't think that you need grinding Ignus. However, if you're looking into a way to win the game, then Purphoros might be something to consider depending on what you want to do. But honestly, a much better option is Walking Ballista. This is an activated ability. Actually, it has 2 activated abilities. You can remove a +1 counter from it, but you can also pay 4 mana into it to put a +1 counter on it. So if you have infinite mana, then you can make this into an infinite. But if you don't have infinite mana, it's still a pretty good creature inside deck because you can activate your creatures to fuel the Walking Ballista's activated ability that put +1 counters on it. So it's both like an interactive creature removal inside deck as well as a finalized outlet when you have infinite mana. Scavenging Ooze is currently an amazing hate bear because graveyard strategies are all over the place in various forms. Your opponents want to utilize their graveyard, and I mean this deck want to utilize the graveyard. Scavenging Ooze would be a great hate bear versus this deck. Doffy Voidwalker is obviously better, and we're having Doffy Voidwalker inside this deck as well, but more the merrier, right? Now you could use Scavenging Ooze and Tazri by tapping Scavenging Ooze to activate itself, or just activate even more and here and there and remove graveyards from the opponent's field, so to say. It's good. It's okay. It's a playable cEDH card currently in the current metagame because of the amount of graveyards that exist out there, and it will synergize with your commander. We also have Kogla, the Titan Ape. Now this is a really expensive creature, but it has actually proven to be both of a interactive card that can destroy artifacts and enchantments here and there, but also a form of combo piece because it return target human you control to its owner's hand. And Village Bell Ringer is a human. Now, by the way, your Village Bell Ringer will go to your graveyard from a Tazri's activated ability. And also, Intruder Alarm will also go to your graveyard here, by the way. But returning cards from your graveyard isn't like an impossibility, so to say. And Kogla and Village Bell Ringer will go infinite. So it's something you could play, so to say, depending on how you feel about it. Here is actually a way to generate creatures from your graveyard where you want to have a static ability, so to say. Lasav the Multifurious has an activated ability, and he can become a creature that's in your graveyard. Not in general necessary, but I kind of want to mention him because depending on how you're building your deck, he could be quite good, so to say. We have Magus of the Will, really slow, not that good because it's a little bit expensive to get that Yawgmoth's Will effect, but I kind of want to mention him anyway because once again, this is a creature with an activated ability that you could flip into that could work with your graveyard. So depending on what form of combo you're building with Tazri here, he's something to consider, even though I don't really want to recommend him. We have Ruthless Technomancer. Now this is a really interesting creature actually, with an activated ability of sorts. Now the cool thing about him is the sacrifice X artifacts, return target creature card with power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, X can't be 0. So this is a creature with an activated ability that you're gonna get into your hand with your Tazri's activated ability, and this creature can actually bring back creature cards from your graveyard. So he's also a very interesting creature for this kind of deck depending on how you're building it, because you could end up with a lot of creatures here and there. Now I really think we should mention Dread Return as well. It has a flashback cost sacrifice X creature, so you can cast this from your graveyard to return target creature card from the grave to the battlefield. Great! This is gonna do exactly what we need. We can sacrifice a few tokens or a few useless creatures that we don't need to bring back a key creature card that we can't get into play from Tazri, or a key creature card that was interacted and killed by one of your opponents to rebuild your combo, so to say. It can get Dockside into play, it can get Fastest Oracle into play, etc. I hope I've showcased a whole bunch of various creatures that are actually kinda good, and a few that are discussable, so to say. But in general, a lot of creatures that are actually really good, that will function with this kind of strategy. The Intruder Alarm and Tazri, so to say. And honestly, I don't even think you always need the Intruder Alarm either, because in this little showcase, we got to see a few creatures that could perform a similar combo like the Intruder Alarm without the Intruder Alarm. Because in the end, I actually think that this commander will play pretty similar to how decks are utilizing Kiki-Jikis. They are making infinite tricks with Kiki-Jikis, so to say. And how this deck will basically be a 5-color Kinnan deck as well as a 5-color Grenzo deck. And even if you don't really have your Intruder alarm, Grenzo and Tazri together will be pretty good. And also this is a really good example of a 5-color Yisan, so to say, as well. But there's another really important discussion we also need to have, and that is, what about Tazri together with Sisay Weatherlight Captain? The answer is yes, but not as good as you might think. You see, Sisay already have a really good option. Esika, God of the Tree, that will give all of your legendaries Vigilance, but will give all of your legendaries, especially the ones that doesn't have activated abilities on them, the ability to tap for mana. Tazri will only give your creatures with an already activated ability on them to tap and activate for mana. And in Sisay's deck, you usually play a lot of most creatures without activated abilities on them. So in general, Tazri doesn't always do that much, where Esika just does more. However, Tazri has an activated ability on him that can fuel value for Sisay. I mean, there are situations where Sisay aren't in play, and you can't really get Sisay into play, but then Tazri could actually function and play the game anyways. So Tazri could function like you could view it like a secondary Tazri Sisay value and in your side deck when you don't have your Sisay. So it's something to consider. It's not a dead card, but in general, Esika and Sisay on the board state will be better than a Tazri and a Sisay on the board state. But now we should talk about which one is actually stronger here. And I think you're all gonna say, hey, well, duh, Sisay is much better than Tazri. And you are in general right. However, there is something really good with Tazri, the Stalwart Survivor. And it is probably gonna solve Sisay's biggest problem in the entire world. Sisay is telegraphed. Sisay is calculatable. You can look at Sisay's board state and figure out if Sisay is going to win. Tazri is random. Tazri is unpredictable. You don't always need to interact with Tazri because Tazri could fizzle. Which means that people are gonna ignore it. When I play Sisay, Sisay just ends up being killed all the time because people will go, okay, you have that creature and you have Sisay, which means next turn you will win the game. Because my opponents have played against me quite a lot, they have figured out how to beat Sisay and when to beat Sisay. And Tazri is really tricky to figure out when to interact with Tazri. So there's absolutely a very strange advantage playing Tazri actually. Also, sometimes Tazri's activation can give you more value compared to Sisay's activation. It kind of depends, and you need to build your deck really specifically to make that work. Sisay on the other hand can be built a little bit more less skewed towards legendaries. I mean, you don't need a really high count of legendaries to make Sisay into a very function turbo Sisay commander deck, where in Tazri's case, in order to make that really efficient activation that gives you an enormous amount of value, you need to build him very specifically towards a really high creature count. Like a really high creature count. And that isn't always great. I mean, you have blue, so you have access to counterspells, and counterspells is not really gonna synergize with this commander's strategy in general. This commander strategy wanna have a lot of creatures in it, while in Sisay's case, you could include a lot of counterspells, and it doesn't really affect your deck in general. So in the end, I'm still going to say that Sisay is way better, but Tazri shouldn't be ignored. There's definitely something there that is interesting and of value. And I really think the unpredictability and where people are gonna be greedy is where Tazri is going to shine over Sisay. Hope you liked this long in-depth video about Tazri, both of a card review and a form of deck tech. And always, in the description below of the video, I will leave a link. I'm going to leave a link to an Intruder Alarm Tazri build, because that is in general the big thing you want to do with Tazri. But I want to point out that you can do other things with him as well. An Ad Nauseam strategy in 5 colors should work pretty fine too. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.